Welcome back to Middleborough High's Summer School. My name is Amara Brady. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm calling in from the land of the Lenape, now known as Brooklyn, New York. And today I am in conversation with Dr. Deion Hawkins. Deion, would you like to tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm currently a professor of communication studies at Emerson College, which is located in Boston, Massachusetts. In terms of I'm a critical race theorist. I'm a critical scholar, which means I look at how kind of race and the intersections of race and power in various capacities. For me, my background is in how race impacts health. So a lot of my work has looked at HIV in the Black gay community, as well as treating police brutality as a public health problem opposed to a political problem. So looking at the health impacts of police brutality, both physical and mental health. And in addition to that, I have been involved in competitive debating and public speaking since I was 13, and now I run the college's debate team.
That's amazing. Yeah, I never did speech and debate, but I started doing oratory competitions in preschool,
Okay,
and
very
that was
similar.
like how I did it. Yeah.
Yeah, very similar.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what have you been doing in COVID? Like your work is so critical and necessary, and especially in this moment, like things have kind of taken off. How
Yeah.
has that like affected you?
For sure. My work in COVID has definitely been. So the one thing I will say is that, like everyone, in the midst of a pandemic, it's kind of forced to like take a step back, reflect, and realign priorities. And then, obviously, while we were in the midst of the pandemic, as we all know, there were multiple protests across the country. So for me, I used that as an opportunity to start to research, right? Because what I found was a lot of conversations that my white friends were having, even white allies were having, were very different than the conversations that my Black friends were having. And for me, my white friends kept telling me like we're never taught about the police in the same way that you are. So I was like, that's so interesting to me. It's like living in two different worlds. So I was able to get IRB approval, which is the official protocol that you have to do any research. And what my current study is on is researching how Black families communicate messages about policing and about police brutality, and like when that happens. So just a brief example of one of the findings that's really interesting is that a lot of my the white respondents would say, I don't talk about police brutality with kids, so like below teenage years, right? Because I don't want to scare them. I want them to trust the police. Where the Black parents were the complete opposite. They were saying, or they said to me, it's not that I want to have this conversation with my child about police brutality. It's that I have to have this conversation with my child because the world doesn't see my child as just a child, unfortunately. And two, they have to know that they have to play by a different set of rules than their white friends. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, and like a lot of Black families who like lived in the suburbs have said, I moved out here for safety or for the quality schools, but then now I'm having to recognize that that largely means that my child's the only Black child at the school. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell them, you cannot act the same way that your white friends act. And we're talking about parents who said they had this conversation at like 7 and 8 years old. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, Tamir was 12.
Mm-hmm.
Anna Stanley was 7.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and also, like, when you look at the high numbers of Black and brown children who are, like, heavily brutalized in the
Yep.
school system and
Yep.
forced into, like, being suspended where their white counterparts would get, like, a slap on the wrist,
Yeah.
even at, like, 6 years old is wild.
Yeah, it's research out there to indicate that as early as preschool age, kids with darker skin are ridiculed and punished more severely. So it's sad, and enlightening at the same time, because these are things, just like I tell people all the time, so much of academic research, being a Black academic, a lot of times there are things that seem so intuitive that like have been
Mm-hmm.
my like lived experience. So I'm like, why do I need a study to prove this? But then I realized the study is not just for me, right? It's to prove it to other people. And that what makes being I'm a first generation college student. So what makes being a first generation college student that went into academia so important for me is that I want to research things that other people aren't. I want to give voices to the people that other people have not done. So that's one of my kind of linchpins that I hold true in my research, is to always center the voice of who I think are the most marginalized and who I think are the most like forgotten.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that you're saying, I've been thinking a lot about it, is the thing that like integration did not give us, is that we started to assume that they would see us as people when we were their peers and their classmates and we're in the same spaces as them.
Yep.
And like to find out that so many doctors still think that Black people feel pain in a different way is like, that was the thing for me where I was like, oh, we have to like go back to the basics of humanity.
Medical students. Yeah,
yes.
Like you said, medical students. So that's so crazy. So that was so my last year of doctorate, I think that came out within like, I think 17, I want to say, because I did my doctorate in Virginia at George Mason University. And if I'm not mistaken, that study is from the University of Virginia, where they polled their medical students. And you're right, it was less pain. But it was literally at like the biological level, right? Like they found that doctors believe that Black people have less pain, like nerve endings. Like, and when you look at any research, it's key. So I mean, it doesn't make sense, but it's very clear that mindset is impacting care over time. So they believe we are less likely to adhere to strict protocols. So things like cancer treatments. There's research to indicate that Black women that have breast cancer, Black men that have prostate cancer aren't given the most effective or most long-term treatment because doctors already assume that we're not going to do it. Right now, there's a lot of talk about Black maternal mortality, Black women who die giving birth either or from complications. And I have experience with this because I was working as a like a consultant or co-author on a project. And so we were looking at, so what the kind of research I do is qualitative. So it's a lot of interviews, focus groups, analyzing like how people talk, what people talk about, that sort of thing. And what I was noticing is that when white women were asking questions to their OBGYN, they were called like, it's a term called a patient engagement, engaged in care, or treatment adherence is what it's called in the public health area. But when Black women would do the same exact thing, it was defiant. It was like a know-it-all. It was what was the word? It was dang. I'll think of the word, but it was another word besides defiant. That combative. That was it. That was the word.
Oh my God.
Aggressive and combative. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, no. This, and I'm the only Black person on the project. I'm like, this isn't. This is the same thing. I was like, this is an example of systemic racism, and they were the most well-meaning white people, and I think to them that's what made it harder, and I think that's what makes a lot of our race conversations right now. We're at a critical juncture. Is that a lot of quote unquote woke people, a lot of people who have never had to reckon with racism, have seen like the sheer number of police brutality and the sheer number of injustices and racial inequities across all arenas. And it's like, now people have to deal with it in a way that they weren't before. And that was just an eye-opening example to me because it was so blatant.
Yeah. It's really interesting to me the way, I don't know, because I just feel like for white people to say that like they didn't know that racism existed in this way, that police brutality was affecting our community in this way, meant that like every song that, like every NWA song you listen to was like, it didn't get past surface level. Every like Public Enemy song you listen to didn't get past surface level. Watching The Hate U Give, reading all of these things, none of it got past.
But you know, they can, so those are kind of foundations of our culture, right? So I tell people this all the time even when I teach, is that as minorities of any sort, a lot of times you are exposed to dominant culture. So like as a woman, right, like like let's think of, I'm trying to think of a stereotypical like quote unquote like man thing. like as a woman, you have been exposed to, let's say, like sports, for example, football, right? That would be what people say stereotypical, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of men have never had to understand women's soccer. A lot of men have never had to understand the WNBA. Same thing with white people, is that we have always had to understand whiteness to live and survive and thrive in America.
Yeah.
Well, survive, let alone thrive in America. White people can go their whole life without ever having to call out racism, and nothing about their life has changed, right?
It's the duplicative minority experience.
Yep, exactly. So I 110% agree with you. Like I mean, when you know George Floyd's case happened, I was like, I mean, this is tragic, absolutely. But I kept, from someone who researches this, I kept thinking to myself, what about it, about his
is different?
Right, like it was like overnight almost, like people had just woke up, and that was the thing that they were like, this is enough is enough. And I'm glad that happened, but it blew my mind that like that was the case. And I think it was a kind of perfect storm of things. I think people were frustrated with COVID. People had a lot more time on their hands. So yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well, because like I did my undergrad at the University of Oklahoma right around the time that Terrence Crutcher happened, and I was like still in college when Alton Sterling and Philando happened, and so like I just remember like doing a die-in and the kids in the cafeteria laughing at us, and I was like, how do we get from there to here in like 3 years time? Because I was just so convinced that like nobody gave a shit,
right?
And I was like, what just happened? What is this like thing?
Even from someone who researches it. So like I've researched, so my dissertation was about police brutality. So, you know, you have to have chapters that trace history and that sort of thing. Even history will say it was unprecedented, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not just like media coverage is different, or like we're making it up. It was unprecedented in terms of like protests, social movements. Every state, it's never happened that every state had a large protest.
All of these white people at the front lines, like sacrificing their. I was like, I don't remember this in the civil rights era, let alone like in the last like 10.
It happened in the civil rights movement, but not at the level that we saw. Yeah.
And I feel like in the civil rights movement, it was like more of an equal thing. Like everybody was a freedom rider, so everybody was getting their ass beat type of deal. Versus like, we are going to stand in front of you because we know that the police de-escalate when they see us.
Yeah, even even recently, the group of moms in Portland, majority white, making that like front line.
And it's been interesting to see people go, they're tear gassing us, and I wasn't ready for like the retired Navy veteran who went up to them to talk to the feds in Portland, and then they started beating him with the baton, and he was like, I didn't know that my government did this. And I was like, girl,
we've been telling you.
Welcome.
Right.
Welcome.
We've been telling y'all this for, it's just so much. Like police militarization is out of control. And it's like, you hate to even have to discuss this problem, but it's refreshing that we're not talking about it just to ourselves anymore.
Yeah.
From my perspective, at least.
No, I think that's true. I think I was definitely one of the people who was very frustrated at the top of this, where I was just like, y'all are you gonna step in now? Or are you not gonna step in now? Like, what is about to happen? And like the consistent like education and re-education of white people in this period of time has been very interesting. And the call for like, compensate me for my work, compensate me for my knowledge, and the conversations that I'm giving you have been very interesting. But like, it's nice to like be on a similar page, if not the same one, for the first time in like my lifetime.
Right. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see people embracing. So it's like I told, when I wrote my dissertation in 2018, you know, I called for, you know, a policy restructuring and that sort of thing. And it's like defunding the police was like literally like a dream, right? Like that concept is like a wild abstract idea that I thought only existed in like academia, or like a thought experiment, right? Like what
it was Angela Davis's fever dream and nothing else.
Yeah, right. And it's so wild to me that there are people actively like talking about it.
Yeah.
about what that looks like, about what restructuring looks like, what about restorative justice looks like, community oriented policing looks like. So yeah, it's I'm cautiously optimistic.
Optimistic.
Yeah,
Yes. I mean, it's been
realistically
really, I like that, realistically
yeah.
optimistic. Watching people then talk to people, like call out the nuance in the conversation of calling for the arrest of Breonna Taylor's killers and also saying that you want to abolish prisons, and like the issue there has been
Yeah.
very interesting, because like I'm always one of the people who's like, God is in the details, and I miss nuanced conversations, and I'm like, there are things that we're missing, y'all, but somebody said something and I was like, oh, y'all really gonna have this conversation. I think that's brilliant.
Right. Yeah. It's great.
It's a weird and wild time to like be alive.
It is.
We got like, I think we have like roughly 5 minutes. I'm just curious on like your take of, I a lot of my work is about mental health. So like my undergraduate research was high rates of depression in Black women and a correlation with a lack of accurate theatrical representations, because so many of us were suicidal during our BFA times, and I was just like, why are so many of us suicidal? Like Audra McDonald was suicidal during her time at Juilliard, which she's like publicly spoken about and done a lot of articles and interviews about. And I was like, how the
I
fuck
never
did
knew that.
Audra McDonald
I was about to
have
say,
like,
and that's Queen.
I was like, what is this? I was like, it's not just me, it's like me and most of my peers and also the people before me and the people in the school over there. And so
Yeah.
I've just been really curious about like this mental health epidemic, and specifically like how it affects performers. But also I was in a conversation recently, and like all of the white people in the room looked at me like I had just blown their minds when I said that if racism didn't exist, a lot of the mental health issues in communities of color would be affected by that. And they were like,
Oh,
I was like, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, like, when I started to do my research, again, it was one of those things that was like so quote unquote normal for like me, but like research was like, no, that's called trauma. So, like, for example, like chronic stress, or like I literally count how many police officers I see. Like if I go walk to the store, if a cop is on the right side of the street, I go to the left side of the street. I count how many cops I see if I'm downtown Boston. And a lot of my research has other Black people have said, oh, always. Like I always know where a cop is. I am terrified to let my phone die because I think that I need to like live stream Facebook if I get pulled over. And it's like, to me, I'm like, oh, well, yeah, that's just, of course that makes sense. And then research is like, no, 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 that's called hyperarousal and like chronic stress. And like, that is a textbook trauma response. Like, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I started to do more research. And I was like, oh, wait, there's lots of things that we as Black people are in a constant state of like trauma. Yeah, and it wears, and it's called weathering, right? So the concept in public health is called weathering. So the idea that like that racism like slowly like chips away. So if you think of it like how same way that like a river, the smallest river can, carve out a canyon, that same kind of idea is that like racism is a constant, it's a daily thing, and that we as Black people, a lot of us have experienced it from, like we talked about earlier, preschool. So it's like, yeah, once you get an age, you get tired and you start to alter your behavior, but we don't recognize that that altering of behavior is a response for survival, and that even though we're not recognizing it, we're internally stressed, and that's stroke, high blood pressure, heart attack, higher. So it's like a lot of health disparities, sure, can be rooted in socioeconomic disparities, which is also systemic
racism.
Yeah, but it's also literally more stress on the body from racism.
Jesus,
Yeah,
that's a lot.
yeah, it's wild.
I remember I went to Martinique last year, and it's a French colony in the West Indies, and I didn't see a police officer for 9 days.
Yep.
And I was like, and I didn't see another white person for 9 days. And I was like,
yeah,
this hits differently, and I don't know what to do with this information.
It's bizarre. Even in some places in Europe, I love to travel. So like the Nordic countries, like Denmark, I can count on one. I was there 5 days. Count on one hand the number of times I saw a police officer. Yeah, it's wild. It's so, and we've been socialized to think that it's normal, and I think finally we've gotten to a place to where we're like, okay, y'all, no, the way we police in America is not like normal. This is not okay. Like we have soldiers in the streets at this point.
All the memes about, white people saying that police brutality actually affects white people more frequently, and then somebody saying, and y'all are okay with that?
Right.
We are saying that everybody is dying and we don't want people to die.
Right. It's like, I would also march for a white person that was killed by police, right? The problem is that, it disproportionately impacts Black Americans. And like you said, they should be equally as outraged. Like, you shouldn't be content with police killing anyone, even if they're guilty too, because people are like, oh, well, they're guilty. That's not the police's job, right?
Myths of freedom are interesting to me.
Right. It's like that's never, we have a court process, which is also rigged and systemically racist. So like, we also don't have any trust in that forum. But it's like, even if I am guilty, that's not the police officer's job to be judge, jury, and executioner in that moment.
No. Yeah. No, I think that myths of freedom are really interesting. Like, people's belief that, like, if you're not bad, then bad things don't happen to you. And like the myths of freedom in our country and the way it works is really fascinating.
With these COVID masks, this mask stuff.
Girl.
It's wildest.
I'm like, do y'all want to die? Because that's how you die.
We really have just seen police officers brutalize peaceful protesters, and y'all still want to call asking you to wear a mask tyranny? But it's the same people.
It's the same people who got guns, who said, like, I'm protecting my freedom.
And who believe that the right to serve is a thing, right? It's the same people who would say, oh, well, I should be able to refuse service to a gay couple. I should be able to refuse service to X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, one, that's wrong. But two, if you want to hold that belief, it's got to remain constant and consistent, right? So then that store or stores also have the ability to tell you can't come in then if you don't have a mask. Right.
I mean, watching them spit on people has been a lot. And like everything that's going on in Puerto Rico, because these people want to go be tourists and not wear masks and infect the people of Puerto Rico is like,
I didn't even know that.
Oh, they've been spitting on people who've been asking them to wear masks and like destroying stores that have asked them to wear masks when they go visit. And because Puerto Rico is technically a U.S. territory, they can't really block incoming tourists.
They can't block anyone. Yeah. Well, also they also Puerto Rico received less aid.
Yeah.
COVID aid. Yeah. So
also, Native Americans, did they ever receive any aid? Did any of them ever get any of the stimulus checks?
I know a judge ruled on it, but I don't know. That moves a little slow.
Yeah. And I mean, in Portland, they were still using tear gas, even though the judges said that was illegal.
Right. Well, so does the youth.
Because they are above what? Justice.
Yep.
Alack.
Saying that for years.
We have. Okay. Well, thank you for talking to me. I learned so much.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank y'all for watching. I hope you learned some things. I hope you go take these conversations to other people and talk about them and continue the work. The work starts now. It's not stopping anytime soon.
And it's a constant. It's a process, and it's a daily. So it is. I always tell people it is a journey, not a destination.
Destination. Yeah. Always. Yeah. Thank y'all.
All right.
Be safe. Thank you, Deion.
All right. Thank you.